What this publication did is it quantified net bird loss in North America since 1970. 1970 is around when the Breeding Bird Survey began, which is a continent-wide survey during the breeding season of nesting and birds. Since 1970, it's an annual survey, so it's a long-term survey over the last 50 years. And so they used those data with a bunch of other survey data to quantify trends in birds since 1970. And they found a net loss of about 3 billion birds, or about 29% of our North American avifauna have been lost since 1970. Now, most folks ask, why is this? And that's what the ornithological community is scrambling to figure out right now. It's very tough to get smoking guns for the reasons of why these birds have declined, especially if the birds are migratory. They spend over half the year somewhere else. So these birds face a ton of threats: habitat loss, habitat degradation, potentially pesticide use, and then a whole nother set of threats on the wintering grounds and during stopover on their migrations, sometimes up to over 1,000 miles away, migrating each year, twice a year. And so there's a lot of threats, and so the ornithological world is scrambling to figure out why. So if you zoom in on this image from this publication in the journal Science, all of these bars on the left of that center line of the graph are negative trends. So percent trends, percent change since 1970. You can see down here on this beige bar by grassland, these are the bird types separated by guilds of habitat where they live. You see generalists, even habitat generalists have declined. All of these are declines. So the largest declines have been in our grassland systems. You know, a lot of our agricultural landscape looks completely different than it did 50 years ago. And so there's a lot of things going on here, but there's a lot of people scrambling to figure out what to do next. A reason for hope was that after this article was published in the journal Science, there was a phenomenal response to this article. There were hundreds of articles from press outlets in the US and beyond. It reached 1,700 media outlets, this story reached. It had a media reach of 3.8 billion people. It had a broad appeal across political spectrums, and that's because this resonates with people, because people love birds and nature and the outdoors. You know, birds have always been an indicator of how our system and how our world and the health of ecosystems are doing. And so this may be an indicator that it's not doing so well. So what do we do now? So at the same time that this publication was released, they had worked behind the scenes with Cornell Lab of Ornithology for about a year to come out with these infographics to help tell the general public what's going on, to help alert them to these decline in bird populations and what lay people can do to help. And so they have these really cool infographics about grassland birds, and then the total birds, migratory birds, eastern forest birds, and it really kind of quantifies some of these net losses, which are kind of hard to swallow. And we're not talking about really rare species here. We're talking about even eastern meadowlarks, 3 and 4 have been lost since 1970. So this is kind of a big deal, and it's got the whole ornithological world kind of shaken and trying to figure out, you know, ornithologists have known of these declines over the last few decades, but this paper really quantified that. So the North American Bird Conservation Initiative, or NABC, has also come out with some educational content on why should we even care about birds, trying to get the general public to care about this and invested in it and show how birds and our natural systems relate to our lives. So they've come up with these infographics about bird habitat supports clean water. They're good for the economy. They support our health. You know, people spending more time outside in nature watching birds are generally healthier. Also, birds eat 4 to 5 million tons of insects per year. So just imagine what the world would be like with all of those insects around bugging us. That's right. And so birds also remove carcasses from the landscape, preventing disease spreading to wildlife and humans. There's just myriad reasons why birds are important and why we should care. Also, if coffee and wine motivate you, birds also help with those systems as well. So at the same time that this article came out, a website was launched called 3billionbirds.org. You can see that link here. And it proposes 7 simple actions to help birds. And so I like to focus on 3, especially planting native plants, preventing window strikes at your home or business, and then bird-friendly coffee and bird-friendly beef. And if you're not sure what those are, do a Google search after the program and educate yourself. Educate yourself on what you can do. We can all do something. We can all do something today to help birds. So I really encourage you all to look into what you as an individual can do, what you can talk your friends and family into doing for birds, because they really, really need our help. Okay, let's move into, these were all my slides, right, Dana?
You are correct.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we've done this before, but we have to practice every time. So let's move into equipment. So if you're a brand new birder, a lot of the questions I get, and I'm sure Dana and Ethan get as well, is I'm a new birder, what do I need to get started? And so it's relatively simple. You will need a pair of binoculars. That's probably the biggest investment when you're getting started birding. You don't need the most expensive pair. Just don't get the cheapest pair that you can find. You want something mid-range. You want something okay quality, because if you get a really cheap pair of binoculars, A, they're not going to work that well and you won't be able to see the bird up very close. And B, they'll be low quality and they can cause eye strain. And if you get a headache every time you look through your binoculars for a few hours, you're not going to want to bird watch ever. So you can spend anything you want, from like a few $100s to a few thousand, but find some mid-range ones, because it's an investment. You're not going to be buying binoculars, every few years. Hopefully you'll have them for a long time. So I like to pitch it like that. There are also loaner programs at all of our, I believe all of our nature centers across the state. There are binocular loaner programs that people can check out and use around the nature center and outside to practice and test those out. So that's helpful. So you'll need a pair of binoculars to see birds up close. If you're just getting started and you don't want to invest in binoculars yet, put up a bird feeder out your back door or back window so you can see the birds up close when they're on the feeder. That's a good way to start to see if you like the activity. Another thing you'll need is a way to identify the birds. And so most birders have an old dog-eared field guide with ripped edges and coffee stains all over them, that we've lugged around everywhere we go. And I do like having a paper field guide as well. But there are a lot of free apps on your smartphone that are also very handy, and they also sing you the songs, which can be very helpful. And so the Audubon Society has a free bird ID app that you can download. And then the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is like the premier group for free bird education and bird research at the university. They have a free bird ID app called Merlin. And so both of those are free and they're really, really great. Allaboutbirds.org is a fantastic resource that I use all the time. A lot of people use it all the time. It's essentially an online field guide that'll tell you a lot about natural history of each bird. Each bird has its own account. It has all North American birds, and so it talks about what they eat, where they nest, what size they are, just a bunch of great information. It's all free. So check that out. I always rely on that site. Dana, I will hand it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So let's get into a little bit more about sort of some basic bird ID. So whether you are an experienced birder on here, and I do recognize some names of folks that probably get out birding even more than Sarah and I do, but there's a ton of people I don't recognize. And so, but whether you're very experienced or this is sort of the beginning of your birding journey, there's a few things, a few kind of good, quick, easy ways to get started in terms of ID. And I would say that some of them you are probably already doing, even if you don't know it or no one ever told you that it's a good way to do it. So when you look at this particular slide right here, and this is all silhouettes, right? Do note, please, that we're not seeing any color in any of these birds, but I bet you can get really close to IDing either all of them or most of them, at least down to, you know, kind of the family group they're in, right? So that large tall bird that is on the lower left, yes, that one. I bet folks can make a good guess, right, as to what that is. And while we're on the slide, do feel free if you like to put your guesses into the chat. Hopefully that's okay with Austin. And what about in the upper right up there, the far upper right? You know, we might not know what exact species that is, but we're all thinking hawk, right? Maybe vulture, maybe, but probably hawk. And our lower left bird is a heron, a wading bird of some kind. So I would bet that, you know, folks on here are seeing these silhouettes. They're seeing gull in the middle. They're seeing birds on the wire, maybe mourning dove, maybe jay. And then, you know, on the other fence post right of the gull, you see what? An owl silhouette, right? So just on that basis alone, we're already into the ability to look in the right part of the field guides that Sarah was talking about just now. So next slide, please, Sarah. So basic bird ID. So a lot of times, and I certainly did this when I was getting started birding, and it's partially because of what we as humans sort of do naturally, especially if we're visual people. There's some people that are a lot more attracted to auditory learning, but visually, I look at color, right? That's pretty much the first thing that I typically look at when I see something. That's what I'm drawn to. But I quickly learned, and I've heard from other folks that this is true for them as well, that that can be misleading, and we'll talk about why a little bit. So some things to really look for are size and shape, part of which we looked at in the silhouette slide. The bill or beak, pretty much interchangeable words there. So you can see the avocet and the cardinal that are pictured here have wildly different beaks, right? If you look at them, that's going to be one of the first things that you're going to notice. Then looking at color and markings, we'll talk a little bit about what we call field marks or ID marks. Habitat is almost always a great clue. There are some generalist species, but a lot of our species here in Missouri are you can easily discern between your choices of two species by the habitat you're in if you get it down to two species. And then, of course, song and the individual songs that our species have. And we'll present some of those as well. Okay, so size and shape. Again, we're at the silhouettes. Now, we might look at these, right, and think, relatively speaking, sparrow-sized and shaped bird. The bird in the middle, robin-sized and shaped bird. And then the bird on the right, more of a crow or raven size or shaped bird. So thinking about those relative differences, and folks do note that there are times when size might help you a lot, particularly if birds are standing next to each other, as in the slide. And there are sometimes, and I would bring up the example of downy versus hairy woodpeckers, sometimes size is so relative that it's really hard if you don't have like a benchmark that's right next to the bird, at which point you can, go on to one of these other factors. Okay, so here's some more examples of just very, very different sizes, but also shapes of birds. So I've heard some birders talk of this using the word gestalt, sort of an overall immediate sense that you get of a bird's size and shape and how very different they can be from each other. So here we have a golden crown kinglet and a scissor-tailed flycatcher, and based on their shape alone, you're not going to mistake one of these for the other. The very unique shape of a roadrunner. And also on the bottom right there, we have a cerulean warbler. So in addition to, shape, think about posture. The posture of that roadrunner is going to be very different from some of the other birds that you see. Very upright, tail upright. Wrens are also a good example of this. They often have their tails kind of cocked up. And all of these things are just helpful markings, factors that you can sort of all put together to come up with your ID. Bill and beak. This is a super important one. Sometimes it's hard to determine if we want to talk about bill and beak first, even before size and shape. So Sarah, if you pull up a few more, we can see some wildly different beak shapes, lengths, how much they project, how conical they are. Not comical, but conical. like the seed eater at the top there with the really cone-shaped beak. And a lot of times this is very much related to their diet, right? So we have the cone-shaped beak, very indicative of a seed-eating bird. You can see that nightjar down at the bottom opening its gape, and they fly around catching insects on the wing. So very, very different from any of the other birds that are pictured here. And then, of course, we have our shorebirds, and then I believe that's a shoebill that is not in Missouri, but a great example of a really identifiable, really unique bill shape.
Boat-billed heron.
Boat-billed heron. All right. Where are they?
Central America.
Very good. Okay, so now we get to color. And once you've sort of put into your conglomeration that you're thinking of the size and shape and the bill, you're gonna, be noticing what habitat you are in anyway, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But then you can start to look at some of the color differences in birds. And Sarah's going to get into this a little bit more, I think, in a minute, but just the sort of overall markings as well. So I think a great example is the upper right bird is a black and white warbler. You can see it's not the most creative name that anybody ever gave a bird, but it's very, very descriptive. And you can see that in addition to being the colors black and white, those appear on this bird in sort of a streaky fashion. So in some cases, color is very helpful. A lot of folks are very familiar with the Baltimore Oriole, so that's the middle bird on the left-hand side there, because of that very rather unique bright orange and black contrast. So a fairly familiar backyard bird. We'll talk a little bit more about orioles because we do have another one here in Missouri that's kind of similar to the Baltimore Oriole. So color and certainly the way that color is patterned on a bird can be very helpful. However, Sarah, if you do one click, I think it's one click. Oh, here's our orioles. Thank you. So the bird on the right is a orchard oriole, and you can see like when these two pictures are right together, right? You can see that the orchard oriole there on the right has a very deep chestnut colored orange, right? Reddish orange. Whereas our Baltimore Oriole is like bright Halloween orange. So if you are fortunate enough to see these birds together, they'll be pretty easy for you to ID. But if you don't, and in different lights, it might be a little more difficult. And both of them, as I said, are here in Missouri. And so if you focused on color alone, particularly with different light conditions, you may, not be able to tell these two orioles apart. So now we have some blue birds. So we have our eastern bluebird, of course, our state bird, but then we also have the very, very common breeding bird, indigo bunting, and the less common, but still here in Missouri, blue grosbeak. And so look at things like the differences in their bills. Look at that grosbeak. I mean, its name is literally big beak, and you can see why. And so I think something that happens is a lot of folks will consider any bird that is blue to be a blue bird, but we really do have several different species. You can add blue jay to this. Male American kestrels have a lot of blue as well. So there's a lot of things that you want to take into consideration besides color. Then the infamous brown streaky bird as well. We've got a lot of brown streaky birds here in our state, and they're awesome. Sarah mentioned getting a decent pair of binoculars, and one of the great joys of having a decent pair of binoculars is to be able to see the subtle differences in birds like our brown streaky birds, because if you really get a good look at them, they actually are very different, but it does take usually some pretty good optics to be able to see those subtle patterns. So on the left there, oh, wait, brown creeper. We have a brown creeper on the left and then a song sparrow on the right. And you can see, folks, right, that brown streaky, So these birds could be mistaken for each other, but look at the differences in the beak shape, and also look at the very big differences in their posture and the way they're sitting. So the creeper creeps up trees. You will not see a song sparrow doing that. So those are both, the beak shape and the posture and movements are actually better field ID help for you than the fact that they're brown and streaky. And now the famous yellowbird example. So all of these are gorgeous, beautiful warblers. Warblers can be, I'm sorry to say this in a spring bird ID class, they can be very, very challenging. I don't know about Sarah, but I don't usually advise that people start birding in spring because it's very challenging and can be overwhelming. So if you are a beginner, do enjoy the spring, but don't get overwhelmed. We can see these pictures in these warblers here. So going clockwise, we have a yellow warbler, go figure, a blue-winged warbler, a Kentucky warbler, a hooded warbler there in the bottom middle, and then a prothonotary warbler. And we'll talk about a few of the more common of these. But a lot of times these birds are they're fast moving, they're foraging for small insects. Oftentimes, most of the time, you're kind of looking up at them. And so you don't just want to note to yourself, hey, there's a small yellow bird, it's probably a warbler, because unless you have something as unique as that adult male hooded warbler there in the bottom center, just knowing that you have a small yellow bird in Missouri is not going to get you down to what species it is. I think it's you, my friend.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so Dana mentioned this before, but habitat can clearly really help us narrow down what species we're looking at. And all of those are in your field guides. They're on your apps, on your phone, also on the allaboutbirds.org. All of those will have habitats. So there are definitely places you can look once you've figured out in general what your bird may be. And so in habitat, we see a great egret in our sandpiper here. You're not gonna see these walking around a grassland. There's a bird that looks similar to this bird that could walk around in a grassland, just to make it as confusing as possible. But you're not going to see a great egret in the middle of a forest. So it just helps you narrow it down. That's what we're trying to do today, is to give you some context on where to start. You're not going to be a pro after this presentation, but we're just trying to give you a flavor of where to start and some resources. So in a grassland, similarly, this is a dickcissel, and some of us may be familiar with the bob white quail. And so you'll find these out in grassland open systems. You may find a quail in like an open woodland system, which we're going to cover here in a little bit. But you won't find these birds too often near the wet center of a wetland anyway. Habitat, say we're in forest, you would see things like a scarlet tanager, a red-eyed vireo, a wood thrush, or Carolina wren. Again, some of these species are more generalist than others. You may find a Carolina wren in many of these habitats, but they're generally around wooded, brushy areas. And so just starting to narrow down and get a feel for what birds you'll see and what habitats can really help. So again, our field guides will have habitats. And so this is a good example of that shorebird I was talking about earlier you can find in a grassland. So this is an upland sandpiper, and this is a solitary sandpiper on the right. If you don't know much about birds, I mean, I know some about birds, and these birds look really, really similar. You know, they're brown and white streaky. They're white on the underside. And they can look very similar, but the bird on the left, upland sandpiper, is a grassland bird. They nest in open grasslands, not near water. And the solitary sandpiper, you'll only find in a wetland. So yeah, habitat can really narrow it down when species can look very similar. And so songs also help us narrow this down. So we don't want to focus too strongly on song today, though that is a very enjoyable and really, really fun part of birding, is figuring out your bird ID by song. Some of us may catch on to this quicker than other people, but one way to help memorize bird songs is called mnemonics, which is just assigning words to the bird songs you hear to just help it stick in your memory. And so some of our birds are named after their mnemonic, like chickadee-dee-dee-dee. So chickadees say that, and they're also called chickadees. Carolina chickadees can say Carolina. And so if you, while a black-capped chickadee just says 2 notes, and a Carolina goes, so sometimes it can help stick in your brain. A tufted titmouse is pretty generally accepted that it says Peter, 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 Peter. And Bob White is named after the sound it makes. Whippoorwill, whippoorwill, whippoorwill. And then pee-wee. That's the best one. But yeah, some birds are named after the sounds that they make. Other mnemonics are less intuitive, like I think northern Perulias say cheeseburger, cheeseburger, yum, yum, yum. A lot of people don't hear that. I think I'm the only one, and a few of my friends and other people just think I'm nuts. The white-throated sparrow, I think in general, is accepted as saying, Old Sam Peabody, 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 or, oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada. So there are a lot of different mnemonics that different people use. Indigo buntings are thought to say, sweet, sweet, choo, choo, sweet, sweet. Other people think it says, fire, fire, where, here, here. So my theme for any mnemonic is whatever works with field markings, with songs, whatever it takes, however dumb it is to you or to others, whatever it takes to get it to stick in your memory, that's what counts. Doesn't matter how silly it is. I've used a lot of silly things to help memorize what birds look like, a few of which I will share with you today, and it will be silly, but it helps it helps us to remember, and whatever works for you. So I'm going to go into field marks a little bit. So we're not going to cover all like parts of a bird and anatomy and all those things, but we do want to point out a few things that sometimes you point to when you're trying to ID a bird. So crest, these are feathers on top of a bird's head. It can raise or lower on its own when it's agitated or curious or looking around for predators. And for other reasons as well. So this northern cardinal has a big, tall crest. Tufted titmouse, hence the name tufted, has a big crest. The belted kingfisher has a big shaggy crest, like all along its head, not in a point, kind of like a mohawk. And then the Carolina wren has no crest, and so all of this just helps you describe these birds. But if you're describing that Carolina wren, you may say it has a big white eyebrow. So just learning kind of sometimes how you would describe on a person what these birds look like. Sometimes people talk about, well, what color cap or throat or breast color was the breast streak? Did it have a spot? For a lot of sparrows, I learned the way to narrow them down is whether it had a streaky breast or a plain breast, or whether it had a central spot on its breast. That was a good way to narrow it down because sparrows can be kind of overwhelming because there are many of them, and to some people they all look the same. So throat and cap, all of these, you can see here on this chickadee that it has a dark, pretty big cap that goes through its eye line. So the whole top half of its head and its throat. You might describe this chipping sparrow as having a rusty cap on top, maybe a black eye line, plain breast. All of those things you get in the habit of starting to describe. And when I see a sparrow, I try and memorize what I see. And if you really focus in on what the breast looks like on a sparrow or what color cap it had, sometimes that helps you when you're looking in your book later if the bird has flown away. Wing bars is another way. If you see this bird, this yellow-throated warbler, just gorgeous. They've shown up in Missouri in the last few weeks. If you saw this bird, you generally wouldn't describe it as having wing bars. You'd probably notice that bright yellow throat and memorize that part of the bird. But when you get into other warblers, like this pine warbler, it can help to notice if a yellow warbler has wing bars or not. That's one way to narrow it down to species. This is a prothonotary warbler. There are no wing bars for comparison if you see this other small yellow warbler. So just trying to get you all in the habit of how you would see these birds, I guess, at first glance. So these are two birds that can occur in wetland areas. The one on the left is a kingfisher, a belted kingfisher, and actually this is the female. The female has a rusty belt and the male does not. So it's one of a few times when the female is flashier than the male plumage-wise. And so this bird on the right is a green heron. It's really skulky and quiet and slow and will hide in the vegetation and creep down low. That neck, it has a neck. It doesn't look like it has one, but it can strike out and catch fish with that big pointy bill. So while these birds have dark steely blue on them, they have big fish-eating bills. Their postures, as Dana said, one sits up very tall, it will perch out on branches. The green heron clearly has big, thick, strong red legs, orangey legs. And it'll skulk right by the water fishing. So look at the behaviors and the postures as Dana mentioned. Oh, hold on. It's not letting me advance. Okay, and so these are two others that some people can confuse. So these are two of our beautiful woodpeckers here in the state. The one on the left is a red-headed woodpecker. The one on the right also has red on its head, but it's a red-bellied woodpecker. And so sometimes the names, even when they're descriptive names, can be kind of confusing to us, and that's okay. The red-headed woodpecker uses like open park-like habitats, really, really open woodland. Sometimes you'll see them out on telephone poles and in parks. They just like really open areas, and they're less common than the red-bellied. Red-bellied woodpeckers will pretty much occur anywhere there are trees. But they have this zebra-striped back, red on the head, but they do have a red wash on their belly, hence the name red-bellied. And then the red-headed woodpecker, you can't mistake for anything. That deep, deep red all over the head and these big blocks of color of the black and white on its body are very striking. But just to get you in the habit of describing the different plumage and what the birds are doing, the habitat they're in can be helpful. So just a little bit, as I go through the birds, which we'll start on the next slide, we will get started on this. I just want to describe the difference between woodland and habitat because I differentiate those habitats time to time. So a woodland is open. It's just a more open forest, and it requires management. It requires some tree removal. So some trees have been removed from this system to allow sunlight to penetrate the canopy and reach the woodland floor to grow vegetation on the floor and provide this thick vegetative layer on the ground. So all of those different pieces of a woodland up in the canopy, kind of a thin subcanopy and that shrubby on the ground all provide different and diverse nesting habitat for different species of birds. Whereas a forest is also a very diverse system, but sometimes not as diverse because over here we have shrub nesting birds can use it. They can nest up in the canopy, whereas a forest, you're either nesting in, the leaf litter on the ground, subcanopy nesters, or canopy. So they're just very different systems. Woodland requires tree thinning and prescribed fire over time to maintain this open understory, whereas forest doesn't include those forms of disturbance. So I just wanted to differentiate. Woodland is more open. Okay, we are going to head into the species. And Dana, can you remind me what species to end on? Do you remember which one you're starting on so I don't go over?
Sarah, I have written that you do northern parula, and that is your last one of the species.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay, we're going to start more common. We're going to start with some common species we can see around our homes, and then we will move into some that are a little less common. So if you feed birds or have trees in your yard or in a rural area, wherever you live, you have likely heard or seen tufted titmice. So they're a very common feeder bird. They're a generalist bird, meaning they'll be found in forest, woodland, on backyards, at feeders, and they're a cavity nester. They use old cavities in trees to nest in because they can't excavate their own cavities with that small little seed-eating bill right there. They're gray overall. We saw in a previous slide, they have a tuft on their head. They have that crest, little buffy wash on the side of them, but overall, they're the most common gray bird that you're gonna see at your feeder. And their song, they say, Peter, 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 Peter. And that can really vary. It can be super fast. It can be slower. It can be very clearly says Peter, other times not. So for some of these birds, there are different dialects. Birds just sing differently like people do. We talk differently. So there is that diversity sometimes from species to species. Next is one of Dana Ripper's favorite birds, the Carolina wren. They are small but mighty. They are just very active, They can be kind of aggressive birds. If you're in their territory, they will let you know. They're very vocal and feisty. So they don't have much of a neck. They're kind of a brown ball. They have a really cool bill, I think. It's just slightly decurved. I just think that they're really cool. They have that big white eyebrow. They're kind of chestnut brown, darker brown on their back, but they have that really rich light brown buffy on their breast, which can help you differentiate it from some other wrens in the state. And they're, like most wrens, their tails are always not always, but they can cock up when they're agitated, when they're jumping around. They never really sit still. If you if you've left like an old flower pot or a pile of like junk on your back porch or a boot outside in the spring, you may have had a Carolina wren nest in it. So they make kind of like a really messy nest with an outward facing entrance hole with a lot of different things in it. Here's an example of that. And they say tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. But again, there's a lot of variation. I'll play two. Tea kettle, tea kettle, tea kettle. It's very fast. But then there are slower ones too. So a lot of variation in that song. And it's a fast one right after it. And these birds are here year round. Okay, Eastern Phoebe. Yes.
Sarah, can I say something just super quick that helped me? Is because you're bringing up birds that are here year round. We sometimes do hear them sing even when it's not, mating and nesting season.
Yeah.
But then they do get a lot more vocal and a lot more frequent in their vocalizations, obviously, when they're singing to defend a territory or attract a mate. And one thing, when I was starting out, Carolina wren got me often. And one of the reasons it did was the variation that you just mentioned, but it was also that it's such a strident song that I associated so much with spring that I would always kind of, I'd be like, oh, there's like a new warbler that I don't know or whatever. And it would be a variation of the Carolina wren song. So I really like that you're pointing out a couple of these, common resident birds, because it's good they help narrow down your options. Like if you really get to know like your Carolina wren and your tufted titmouse real well, when a new bird does show up, you can be like, okay, it's not those two. So
yeah, those are really good points. I'm glad that you brought that up. Yeah, and I'm sorry, some really common birds get me every single year, especially when I'm out like teaching bird ID. That's when I always mess up the most. But yeah, Carolina wrens always get me. So I mean, sometimes cardinals get me too. I mean, like, it's just tough. There's a lot to keep track of every single year. There's almost 330 species that occur in Missouri. It's okay to make a mistake on ID, especially when you're starting out. That's a good point. Thanks, Dana. Okay, Eastern Phoebe. This is the little flycatcher that nests on your lights outside your house and on edges and the eaves of your home sometimes. This is a flycatcher. They are migratory. They showed up about 2-3 weeks ago. And these birds use open woodlands, edges. Naturally, if they don't have a light on your home, they will nest on the entrance to a cave, kind of a cliff face. They can squish their nest on any little ledge. And in your backyards. They wag their tail when they perch. And so this bird is kind of nondescript. A lot of flycatchers are kind of grayish and kind of nondescript. And so one way, you rely more on behavior when you see this bird. And I don't have a little video on here, but when they're perched like that, their tail wags out like this randomly. It just seems like an involuntary tick. But they move their tail like this. So if you see this bird and you're wondering if it's this or a different type of flycatcher, look for the tail wagging. And this one also, I think, kind of says its name. It says Phoebe. Phoebe. Really cool bird. Okay. White-eyed vireo is kind of a cool one that I think is kind of special to get your eyes on because I don't think they're as common. So this is a bird of scrubby, early successional young forest. They need that scrub shrub edge habitat for nesting. They just like a more closed in, lots of vegetation. And this is what their nest looks like. It's a really cool, vireo nests are pendulous nests. So they find a little fork in the branch and they form this kind of deep nest like that. And then they stuff their body down in it with their tail and their head sticking out. White-eyed vireos have this kind of yellow wash. What do they have here on their wings? They have wing bars right there. They do have a white eye, hence the name, but they have this yellow wash on the top, along the flanks and on the back and in the tail. But I would look for that pretty white underneath, the yellow, and then that white eye. Their song is beer themed. They say, "Quick, bring me a beer, check," which sounds really silly. I did not make up that mnemonic, but, oh, hold on. Quick, bring me a beer, check. I don't know, whatever works. And then the other song is quick 3 beers, quick 3 beers. I don't know, it's beer themed. That's supposed to play. And that one sounds a little different. So trying to show again those dialects and the differences in that song. So if you hear this song, go looking for this bird because they're a really cool looking one that I don't think you see as often. Okay, red-eyed vireo. This is a bird of our forests, sometimes woodlands, but often forests. They need lots of trees around. They are very common. They are very vocal. Sometimes you don't see them very often, but they're always singing all through the summer. You know, all through the summer, birds get a little bit quieter and quieter, especially in July and August, but this bird is always singing in the background. It can be easy to kind of tune it out. So this vireo is kind of grayish on the head. It has that big white eyebrow. It has a red eye, and then it has kind of like an olive green wash on its back and lighter underneath. This is the female. And their song says, "Here I am, over here. Where are you?" And so they have these little pieces of song that are separated. And I remembered this one in ornithology class because he's saying, "Here I am, over here. Where are you?" Meaning he's lost and he's been crying, so his eyes are red. I don't know. Again, whatever works. Over here. Where are you? Here I am. Over here. Where are you? So it's just these little phrases that are separated. Okay, blue-gray gnatcatchers. Blue-gray gnatcatchers have such personality. They just look really angry too. If it's a male, they have that dark eyebrow that just makes them look really mad. This bird is about this big, super tiny. They never stay still. You'll see them up in the canopy. You hear their little wheezy, whiny song. And this is another one where if you're hard of hearing, well, not another one, but if you're hard of hearing, it's high-pitched and you may not hear it as easily. And so it's easy to kind of not hear in the background. They're blue-gray overall. They have these really cool white on the outer rectrices, black tail in the middle, but the white, you can see that flash when they fly. Again, they never sit still, very active, and just kind of that steely blue on their top. I'll play their song. They're just real whiny. Kind of that two-tone. Hey, right, hey. It matches their angry face. Yeah, they're different. So if you hear this, look up, because they're generally always up in the canopy unless they're coming down to the ground to grab like nesting material. But look up and look for movement because they're always moving. The best bird in the world. You can tell it's true because it says it on the slide right here. Best bird in the world. So I like the eastern wood pewee because I studied them for my master's degree, and they're they're all over the place where there are trees in savanna, woodland, or forest. I searched for this bird's nests and did point counts for it. I spent a lot of time with this bird, and they're just really, really cool birds. They're a flycatcher. They're migratory. They're heard more often than they're seen, but this is another bird that's very vocal in the woods. So it's very common to hear red-eyed vireos and peewees singing the whole summer long. They sing their name, the peewee part, But they're kind of grayish overall. They have really light wing bars. And honestly, you'll hear them way more than you'll ever just see one and say, oh, I wonder what that flycatcher is. Flycatchers are very hard in general to identify. Sometimes they've been described as having a dusky vest, which I think is the cutest thing I've ever heard. So it has these like slightly darker gray patches on its breast that kind of look like a vest. So they say, pee-wee. How can you not like a bird that sounds like that? And then they go, wee. Okay, so they're great. Best bird. Okay, summer tanager. Some people think this is the best bird, and it is a contender because it is absolutely beautiful. This is the summer tanager. We have two tanagers in Missouri in the summer, the summer tanager and the scarlet tanager. I'm just going to hop ahead so you see the difference. Summer tanager is kind of like a strawberry red. Scarlet is more a deeper, brighter, more vibrant red with black wings, of course. So the summer tanager is red all over. The only thing I think you could confuse this with is a cardinal, and the cardinal has that big crest and has black on his face. But the summer tanager is just red all over. The females are yellow. So this is the female up here, or this could be an immature male because they look the same their first year. The second year, immature males start to molt into their red plumage and they look tie-dyed. So they're kind of stuck between the yellow and red plumage and they look freaking cool. They look like they're tie-dyed. So that's always special to find one of those in mid-molt. This bird uses open woodland. Again, we talked about that more open forest. Sometimes you can find them in forest, but not really closed in forest. They like those openings and areas to forage. Their song is tough. It's kind of a warbly song. It goes on. It sounds, I think, very similar to a robin's song. It just keeps lilting and different slurred whistles, and it's very similar to its cousin, the scarlet tanager, but we'll play that. Kind of nondescript. It's just kind of just sounds like a bird song. Then if you hear the call tucked in the middle, they say ticky-tuck-tuck, ticky-tuck. To separate the summer and scarlet tanager, you can listen for the call, the ticky-tuck-tuck, because the calls are different. This song, it takes forever for them to say ticky-tuck-tuck. There it is, ticky-tuck. Okay, scarlet. Gosh, this is a beautiful bird. It's just so striking. It's just like the red-headed woodpecker where when you see one, you can't look away. They're just so pretty, and they're such a special sight to see. So they are in forest. They prefer forest rather than open woodland. They just are this vibrant red. They have the black wings. The female also has the black wings. You can tell them apart from the summer by the darker in their wings. And their song is also kind of slurred whistles, but their call is chick-burr. It sounds a lot different than that ticky-tuck-tuck. So if you hear this, a song similar to this, just wait, and eventually they'll call, and sometimes you can tell the difference from the call. So it sounds it's a little bit slower than the summer, but you're not going to be able to tell that right off. Chick-burr. So the calls are very different. Okay, wood thrush. This is a forest bird. It needs larger contiguous tracts of forest. This bird looks like a thrush, right? It has that spotty breast. Robin young have spotty breasts as well, and that can, even the shapes of the spots, or the shape of the spots can help you differentiate between other thrushes. But this bird needs forest. It's a really cool bird, and it has one of the most beautiful songs. Thrushes have a very complex syrinx, which is their voice box, and so their songs are just notoriously like flute-like and kind of ethereal. So brown on the top, kind of the deeper, redder brown than some of the other thrushes, and then really striking spots on the breast that sometimes point up. They kind of point up towards its face. So I'm going to play the song. Just really complex sounds in their song. If you want to hear a cool bird, go Google a hermit thrush. Their song is just magnificent. Okay, yellow-billed cuckoo. This is a bird of open woodland. Again, an open woodland that has sunlight through the canopy. Cuckoos are kind of, they're kind of skulky. They kind of jump through the tree. When you scare them, or when you come up upon them, they don't just fly out of the tree like some other small birds. They kind of like hide and just kind of hop through the tree. They don't fly like within the tree. They're also a pretty big bird. They're about this big. So they're brown on the top and white underneath. They have this really cool bill that's a little bit decurved. And their sound is very, what am I looking for? It sounds like a cuckoo. It sounds like you're knocking on wood. Sometimes they're called a rain crow. Some cultures believe that they foretell the rain is coming. Okay, ovenbird. So this is a really cool bird that kind of, to some people, may look like that wood thrush we just showed. It has brown on the top and some streaky black on the breast. So this bird also needs mature forest, so we'll find it in the forest. It says, teacher, 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 really loud, and it gets louder and louder as it sings. The way to differentiate this bird is that it has this big orange mohawk down the middle of its head, outlined in black. So it's kind of a piercing song. It gets louder and louder and louder as it goes. You may wonder why they're called ovenbird, and that's because they make a little nest like this on the forest floor in the leaf litter, and it looks like a little oven. You can see the bird's face right here. You can see the orange mohawk right here and the two eyes of that female on eggs in there, or young. It's pretty cool. Okay, black and white warbler. We kind of covered this one a little bit when Dana was talking about color. I love the name of this bird because it's very descriptive. It tells me exactly what it is. This is a bird of woodland and forest. They're a pretty early migrant, so they've shown up in the last few weeks. They're one of the first warblers that have shown up. I find that so fascinating, the timing of when different species show up. I think that that's really neat. That could be a whole webinar on its own, couldn't it, Dana? So woodland and forest, they're an early migrant. They look like a zebra all over. This is the female. She looks creamy or white. She has a little less streaking on the throat than the male. I just think female black and white warblers are one of the prettiest birds there are. They just look so beautiful and white. So this is a bird that's like a brown creeper that Dana talked about earlier. They creep along branches and trunks. You won't see them very much out in the leaves eating. They forage along the branches and the trunk. And they sound like a squeaky wheel. Very high pitched. This is another one that may be hard for folks who don't hear very well to pick up on. It sounds like a squeaky wheel going around. Okay. Dana, I'm just going to give this to you now. Did you not practice Northern?
Actually, I'm showing an alarmed face because our dog just decided that moment to get super loud, but Ethan's got it.
It happens.
I wanted to make a comment about what you said about like blue-gray gnatcatcher, black and white warbler, because I myself do not have the greatest hearing. It's okay. It's not terrible, but there are definitely some things that are difficult. I would say more than anything, difficult for me to notice. Once somebody cues me into them and I, really make an effort to hear them, then I can. But you described the blue-gray gnatcatcher as being a little bit like background noise, especially like in a spring woodland or forest, right? So one thing I'd say is that if especially if you're trying to get to know birds by ear more, it is really helpful to go with a person that's good at birding by ear, not necessarily so they can just like be your own walking field guide and tell you what everything is, but from my perspective, to just point out things and be able to help you differentiate one sound from what could sound to you like background noise. So, and another observation is just I've always found warbler to be a very funny name for this family. Because to me, a warbling song is more like something like the thrushes make. Warblers, they could be called buzzers or squeakers or something like that. So I think the Northern Parula is a really good example of that. They, to me, sound like a zipper. And if you want to go ahead and just play their song, because that's a great way to know them.
Did
So
you
I
hear it?
believe that
Cheeseburger, cheeseburger, yum, yum, yum.
it's not that though. It's chubby, chubby, chubby cheese. So this little tiny bird is actually a pretty aggressive little bird. It shows up fairly early also. Does breed here. If you get a look at it, it's really quite unique. That slaty iron blue on the top, and then that like when I see them, I'm like, oh my gosh, your breast is almost like rainbow colored. You know, lots of deep red shading into lighter red, and then the yellow. And so they typically enjoy hanging out really high and doing their zipper song. And then you really want to see them, but they're like 3 inches long and you get a crick in your neck trying to look. But they're fun to listen to. They'll sing very frequently for a long period of time. And if you can get a look, they're pretty smashing. Another nice feature of them is if you look at closely at their eye, they have what's called a broken eye ring. So it's not a full eye ring all the way around the eye, it's a broken eye ring. Okay, prothonotary warbler. This is a bird that you probably will not have trouble hearing. This is a very, very strident song. This is a bird of the bottomland forest, so flooded forests in riparian areas and river bottoms. Um, Interestingly, it's one of the very few warblers that's a cavity nester. You can see the picture there of a pair near a cavity. And these guys are like, they're like little flying lemons, and they are also not very shy. So if you spend time in this habitat and they are around, you have a very good chance of getting a very good look at the prothonotary warbler, because they're really just not a shy bird, and they don't tend to be particularly high in the canopy either. So you can notice some of our field marks that Sarah was talking about. We don't have wing bars on this bird, right? And that yellow without any breakup of the yellow on the breast or the sides or the face is pretty unique. And so if you want to play their sweet, 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 sweet. So this is a bird, if folks are familiar with Carolina wren and sort of the amazing way that such a small bird can really belt out such a loud song, that's sort of how I think of prothonotary warblers. They can be pretty loud. Go ahead. Blue-winged warbler. Okay, so this is a bird that, we have the habitat affinities written here: glade and open woodland forest edges, needs shrubs. I do a lot of surveys in prairies. The folks I work with do a lot more surveys in prairies. And one of the things that we notice is when a prairie starts getting really shrubby and edgy is when we start seeing blue-winged warblers and hearing blue-winged warblers in them. So you can go ahead and play Biz Buzz. It does sound like the bird is blowing a raspberry. So, and they do have alternate songs to that, but that is a very, I think, very unique buzzer warbler song that is fairly easy to identify. Okay, So we talked a little bit about Baltimore Orioles before. You can see the male and female there on the right, side by side. And we'll go ahead, Sarah, I'm going to try and be a little speedy due to time. We want to make sure there's a little time for questions. So I'll just go ahead and ask you to play the song right away. So when they really get into the whistling parts of that, it really, to me, it sounds very loopy. Go ahead to Orchard. All right, very good. So we talked about these guys a little bit, but here is, our more chestnut colored male Orchard Oriole and then the female. And remember, Sarah pointed out how the first year male summer tanager looks really, really unique because it looks tie-dyed, while the young male Orchard Oriole also has a very unique look because that's him on the bottom. It's basically like he has a black beard and bib. And then the next year after that, he will look like the gentleman there on the left-hand side. So go ahead. Okay, this is a nice familiar one. Our state bird, the eastern bluebird. So this bird, as you can see here, likes open woodlands. So very, very park-like. So think of a place where you are walking through trees, but they're very, very far apart. So for example, one place that we often see eastern bluebirds nesting is cemeteries because of the large older trees and a very, very park-like habitat with very little in the understory. And so Michelle asked in the chat earlier about a program on hosting eastern bluebirds that the Missouri Birding Society had last week. And if you look in the chat, there is a link to that video if folks are interested. It was a really, really good program by Steve and Regina Garr of Jefferson City that are bluebird experts. And so if you're interested in hosting bluebirds, I highly recommend checking out that video. So bluebirds are thrushes. So they are related to robins, and Sarah mentioned a couple other thrushes, and they do have a different but thrush-like song. Thank you. All right, in keeping with the bluebird theme here, and we actually, one of the things that we kind of tried to do, although it's fairly difficult, is go kind of from the forest, woodland habitat down through sort of more of the edge, and eventually we're going to get into prairie here in a second. And so indigo buntings are birds of glades and woodlands, forest openings, and then also they're pretty common on the edges of prairies and sometimes within, if there's, a fence row in a prairie setting or a shrubby draw in a prairie setting, you'll find indigo buntings there. And one thing, Sarah's made a couple mentions of like, you'll hear a call within a song sometimes. And aside from their fire, fire, where, here, song, I often listen for a zeet because one of their calls is, they just go zeet. And sometimes you'll hear that in the song. And these guys should be showing up quite soon, and they're common, and you can hear their singing from power lines and all kinds of places. So listen for that song. A little bit about our mimics, just to throw in a little bit of challenge. There are birds that mimic other birds along with human-made sounds such as car alarms or slamming doors or anything. But largely they do mimic other sounds in the natural environment, typically birds. And I think these guys can be really, really tricky. However, there are some tips here. So the gray catbird has a little bit less of a pattern. Brown thrasher is easier because it repeats twice, and then the northern mockingbird can do variation in its repetition, though it does repeat. And it's typically more urban or possibly more like rural farmstead. He really likes that one. So one of the things in regards just really quickly about those mimics is that they are also singers that will tend to sing for a long time. So often they can kind of lead you to where they are so you can get a definitive ID by sight. The catbird is also called so because it'll literally make a call like meow. So if you hear that, and typically they're going to be skulking around in bushes when they do that, you'll know you have a catbird. So that's another helpful hint. Okay, eastern towhee, another bird that is in, you know, sort of open woodland to edgy habitat, shrubby habitat. This bird is a sparrow. It's a big sparrow. You can tell that it's not our usual brown and streaky sparrows, right? But you can see that big conical beak. You've got the male there on the left and the female on the right. And this is a nice song to learn because most people say it says, drink your tea. Your tea. Did everybody hear that? Drink your tea. Okay, we're moving more into savanna and old field and getting into prairie habitat here. So the yellow-breasted chat. So this bird, it will also mimic other birds, actually. It does, what you see there pictured in the diagram is its behavior when it's doing its flight song. So what this bird will do is within its territory, sometimes even over its nest, it will do a very intricate flight. It's almost like a dance that it does, and it will sing while it's doing it. So it's pretty cool to see. Okay, really quickly, folks, just wanted to introduce you to the swallows that are here in Missouri. And so we have several different kinds of several different species of swallows. Probably the most easily recognizable are going to be your barn swallow, largely due to the forked tail, and the tree swallow, because that shiny turquoise greenish color of a tree swallow is very, very unique. And those two are really quite common. So when you're looking at swallows, these can be they can be very difficult. They're constantly on the move, flying around. You want to look at things like the color, of course, but also you can see like that bank swallow has kind of a necklace. You want to look at the rump to see whether it's a white band or not. And then again, sort of more of the shape. So you can see too that barn and cliff swallows look fairly similar. But in that case, you know, kind of look for that forked tail. And there are times, honestly, that if I get into a, you know, flock of swallows and I'm trying to follow them with my binoculars, I eventually give up and just honestly enjoy having swallows flying around because it's a wonderful experience.
It can be super hard. The cliff, I remember, looks like a bank or a barn. It doesn't have that forked tail, but also looks like it ran into a cliff. So it's got that white right there. And then the bank, I think it looks like it wears a necktie because it works at a bank. So that's all I have.
Like it. Okay, a little bit about grasslands. This is our last habitat that we're going to give a sampling of the birds in. And so we've gone from woodland, we've gone through, you know, birds like the towhee and thrasher and even mockingbird and catbird down to our chat. So we've worked our way from trees where there's okay birds like the eastern wood pewee. And so now we'll get into really cool birds. Okay, common yellow throat. So this bird really likes wet areas. So wet meadows, early successional prairies, also wetlands. If you get a good look at this bird, the male, you will see it looks like a masked bandit. And it has a pretty recognizable song. Most people describe it as witchetty, witchetty, witchetty. Okay, field sparrow. A great identifiable characteristic about a field sparrow, I think, is the pink beak is really quite noticeable. Habitat is a good indicator, but there can be, particularly during migration and early breeding season, lots of sparrows around in the sort of prairie edges and shrubby parts of prairies where you would see and hear field sparrows. But a couple of great ID characteristics there with you can see the eye ring, particularly in the picture on the left, and then that pink beak. And then it has a very unique sound that sounds like a ping pong ball. So just as if someone dropped a ping pong ball on a ping pong table. Brown-headed cowbird, this bird is a bit vilified in a lot of ways because it is a nest parasite. So that means that the female will lay its eggs in other birds' nests and leave those young that hatch out of her eggs to be raised by the host. And so this is a native bird species, however. And one of the things that brown-headed cowbirds have really benefited from is the fragmentation of habitat that has sort of allowed them to work their way into more edge than there was historically. And so they have a pretty cool song though. Sounds like dripping water. If there's any other 80s children in the audience, I always think it sounds like the very beginning of a cassette tape from back in the day. And there you can see a yellow warbler feeding a very much larger than it cowbird baby. So this is not, you know, something that everyone loves singing. I don't, especially when it's like tiny chipping sparrows and large cowbird young. But again, this is a native bird. And so its increase in success is essentially people's fault at this point, not the birds. A couple flycatchers of the open country. These are pretty readily identifiable, and they do nice things like hang out on barbed wire and lines. So typically we can get a pretty good look at them. I'm sure that there are many folks on here that have seen a scissor-tailed flycatcher, and wow, what a bird. I mean, it really is one of probably the most striking birds in North America. So in the eastern kingbird, also a very cool bird. Its scientific name is Tyrannus tyrannus, and they are very, very brave. If you see a bird by itself attacking something like a red-tailed hawk, it's often an eastern kingbird. Okay, eastern meadowlark. So a very, this is what a lot of folks think of when they think of our prairies. And I'd like you to just look, we give 3 views here. So you can see the back of the bird and then the bird in flight and then the front. And check out that yellow with the black bib, and we'll see where we see that again. But also do note in this bird, so the short tail, the relatively long beak that starts off as cone-shaped, but then it gets quite long and slim. And when they're flying, and you can see their white outer tail feathers when they're flying as well. When they're flying, to me, they kind of look like little fat balls with like triangle wings. And their song is a very nice accompaniment to the morning. So a very melodic whistle. Western kingbird also occurs in Missouri. They're very, very difficult to tell apart by sight. The western meadowlark, just we're not going to play it, but just sort of starts off the same and then gets kind of more jumbly and complex, whereas the eastern meadowlark keeps that sort of melodic whistle throughout. And dickcissel. This is another bird. It's a funny name, right? Dickcissel. But this is a bird that was also named for its song. It does need grasslands, but within grasslands, it's relatively a bit more habitat generalist than some of the birds we've seen. There's a male there on the left and a female on the right. And what I always found interesting is, even though they're not really closely related, that same sort of color pattern that you just saw on the eastern meadowlark is also right there in the dickcissel. So if you want to play dick chisel chisel. And finally, and this is by no means all the birds of the prairie, but we did want to just give you all a sample. So the bobolink. So there is really, if you see a bobolink, you will say, wow, what is that? And I don't believe that you'll mistake it for anything else. It's a very, very unique looking bird. I think it looks like, it reminds me of like Mozart with a wig or something. The head and back of the male there on the left are obviously very, very unique. The female there on the right, I will caution, can be confused with female red-winged blackbirds. So that's just one to watch out for there. They also do an interesting flight song, and it sounds like R2-D2 in Star Wars sort of put to music.
Quiz time, everybody. Okay, you're on the honor system. We're going to go really fast. You're on the honor system. Okay, Dana, we have number 1. Dana's going to tell us our answers. We have number 1. It's a vibrant bluebird. And I didn't get to say it. It says sweet, sweet, chew, chew. What's sweet that you chew, Dana? Bunt cake. It's a...
That is our indigo bunting.
An indigo bunting. Okay, number 2. That helped no one, I think. Okay, number 2 is that deep chestnut, orangey color with the big black head and hood going down into a bib. Wing bars.
Deep chestnut. What's our deep chestnut oriole?
Does look like an oriole. Got a really pointy bill. It's an
orchard oriole. If it's deep
orchard
chestnut.
oriole. It is. Okay, number 3. It's our very descriptive color warbler. It looks like a zebra.
Black and white warbler.
Black and white warbler. Okay, number 4. We have a soft looking sparrow here. I noticed it has a pink bill, which is very prescriptive. What is this one, Dana?
This is a ping pong ball, the field sparrow.
Ping pong ball with feathers. Okay, we have number 5, which is a very striking bird. Black on top, reddish on the sides. It's a sparrow. I've heard it's a big sparrow. It is a
eastern towhee.
It says, drink your tea. Okay, number 6. It's a song that says, sweet, sweet, choop, choop, sweet, sweet. Or fire, fire, where, here, here.
I think it's the same song as the number 1 bird.
That's right. I tried to trick you. It is a
indigo bunting.
Indigo bunting. Okay.
That's a good one to have twice because we'll be seeing a lot of them, hearing a lot of them sing.
They're all over the place. Okay, number 7. It's in weird lighting, but it's that strawberry red bird all over. No crest. No black wings. Big honker bill. It is a
summer tanager.
You're right. You're such a good birder. You're such a good birder, Dana. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're going to wrap this up pretty quick. Okay, so one place to practice your bird ID, which is an amazing resource, is ebird.org/quiz. And it pulls photos and songs from eBirders out on the landscape. eBird is a massive online database of your birder checklists and bird sightings. And so you can upload photos and sound files when you do that. And so you hit start quiz, you pick your location. So you can quiz yourself on Alaskan birds in the winter or Costa Rican birds in the summer, because you pick your location in the world and when you want to be quizzed, what time of year. You say whether you want to look at photos or sounds, and you start quiz. It shows you a bird from someone's submitted photo and you choose the species. Then you have to rank how good the photo is before it moves you to the next one. Each quiz is different every single time. It's just a really great way to practice, and it's always different. So that's really all we had for you today. I would like to thank Dana. I would like to thank Austin. Thanks everybody for spending time with us.